We've been trying to reach you concerning your car's extended warranty. You should have received something in the mail.
Okay, so if I were to ask you at a glance, don't use Google Lens, don't cheat, what year is this phone right here from? A lot of you would probably say something like 2007, 2008, because it's a flip phone with like no touchscreen, physical keys, and it even has on the back here, if we remove this plastic cover, this insane technology called removable battery. You even have expandable storage, but no physical headphone jack, so that sucks. Well, this phone here was actually made by Sharp for Docomo in 2016. It's called the Sharp Keitai 2 or Sharp Docomo SH-01J because Japanese companies love naming their products like barcodes. And it is actually running Android 5.1. It has a normal Snapdragon 210 CPU, which wasn't powerful back then and is not powerful now. But what this phone right here is something very weird, okay? Because we do have flip phones today, but they're either super basic dumb phones that you give to like your kids or the elderly to make sure they're not currently being stabbed, or they are experimental foldable phones, which are super cool in concept, but they're not really ready for daily use because of like creases and such. This, however, this phone right here is trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It's an actual like honest to God, well-made flip phone that has been somehow made to run Android. Why did Sharp and Docomo make this phone in 2016? Who was this for? Well, in order to answer to that question, I actually have to tell you a story all about how the Japanese phone industry was built by AT&T, kinda. After World War II, during the American occupation of Japan, as part of the American effort to rebuild Japan, AT&T was tasked with assisting the Japanese government in reconstructing the Japanese telegraph and telephone infrastructure. However, when the Treaty of San Francisco was signed in 1951, ending the American occupation once and for all, the Japanese government needed a solution to manage these new telephone and telegraph lines. And so, they established a state monopoly company named NTT. Of course, meaning no thanks to Nippon Telegraph and Telephone. Now, back in the 50s, it was pretty normal for the telephone industry in a country to be entirely controlled by either one company, so a monopoly, or the state using one company, so a state monopoly. And in fact, it was the same in America, where AT&T controlled the entire telephone market. Up until 1982, when the US government decided to break it down into several smaller companies like Verizon in order to actually create a competitive market, because they thought that would be better for consumers. And 3 years later, in 1985, Japan decided that they also wanted to do this, even though their monopoly was a state monopoly, not just a random private company controlling everything. And they decided to turn NTT into a private company. It wouldn't be controlled by the state anymore, and their telephone market would become privatized, meaning anyone could open a telephone company and compete with the newly private NTT. Making NTT a private company was actually a pretty smart move because they did not only have advanced technology for Japan, but for the entire world. In 1979, they became the first company in the world to launch a 1G cellular network, allowing you to call from anywhere in Japan using a mobile phone, which back then meant a car, because mobile phones were so huge in 1979, they could only fit in cars. But over the following years, from 79 to 85, when NTT was eventually privatized, mobile phones became progressively smaller and more advanced. So having a private NTT tackling the worldwide market seemed like a great idea. So during the late 80s and the early 90s, in order to stay competitive in Japan, where they were now actually fighting in the private market, and also maybe expand globally, NTT decided to restructure, and they separated in 1991 their landline business from their mobile cellular one, creating a new company just for mobile phone stuff. Docomo. Sometimes I forget how fucking awesome Japanese commercials are. This was 1991, okay? Mobile phones were becoming more advanced, but they were still extremely expensive. So how does the newborn Docomo try to expand its market share? How does it attract new consumers beyond the relatively small pool of Japanese businessmen that can actually afford to buy a mobile phone? The answer is beepers have been around since forever, and NTT started selling their first ones back in 1968. The way they work is kinda weird for someone like me who was born after they were relevant. Essentially, you would call a beeper, and the beeper would show to their owner a phone number on the screen that they could then use to call you back. And this was essentially a very basic and cheap way to be reachable at all times without having to spend money for a mobile phone. Beepers were commonly used by the working class, by people like nurses, for example, that had to be reachable at all times for emergencies, but couldn't afford to buy a mobile phone in the early 90s. And so, Docomo has the wild idea to take this technology, which seems pretty limited and just for people who really have to be reachable at all times because it's their job, and sell it to high school girls. Starting in the early 1990s, Docomo revised NTT's line of pocket bell beepers, adding a very interesting feature: being able to send two emoticons, a heart and a phone. And if you're like me, you might be wondering, how the hell do you send an emoticon to a beeper? You're supposed to call it and the beeper shows your phone number to the owner. So what Docomo did, as far as I understand, by reading pages and pages of Japanese manuals from the early 1990s was, you would be able to dial when calling a beeper, not only a phone number, but also use your phone's dial pad and combinations of numbers to either send kanas or emoticons. An entire subculture, almost like a secret language, started emerging among high school girls. For example, 0840 meant Ohayo, good morning. 14106 meant Aishiteru, I love you. 724106 was Nani shiteru no? What are you doing? And this phenomenon even had its own name, berutomo, from pocket bell, and tomo, meaning friend in Japanese. There's even a Game Boy game about having your own berutomos. I'm not making this up. Anyway, Docomo of course was thrilled with the success of their pocket bell beepers and with picking the right demographic, and so in 1996 they decided to upgrade them and add even more kanas in the entire Latin alphabet. Unfortunately, in order to make this work, they had to remove something from the beeper's memory, and the heart emoticon had to go. And this wasn't taken well, to say the least. A lot of high school girls immediately switched over to Docomo's main competitor, Telemessage. So, is it over for Docomo? Nope. Because around the same time, they also launched a technology that would make beepers pretty much obsolete overnight. Or at least it would do that for high school girls living in the city. PHS, the Personal Handyphone System, or as Wikipedia calls it, the Poor Man's Cellular, was a Japanese homegrown technology made by Docomo that would allow them to make cheap mobile phones that would let you call, they would let you send messages, and even browse the web as long as you were within 100 meters from the nearest cell. So it pretty much only worked in big cities. And it also wouldn't work if you were in a car, or a bus, or a train. Walking too fast might have been a problem too. But what really put Docomo on the map was something they created in 1999, which was so huge, its direct influence is still felt in today's smartphones. iMode was a mobile phone protocol, a real one. Real phones were finally cheap enough to be affordable for high schoolers. That will let you, in 1999, comfortably browse the web, check your emails, buy train tickets, access online banking services. Basically, most of the stuff we are doing today with our smartphones, they were doing it back in 1999. And if you're about to comment, oh Femi, this is a stretch, skull emoji, the reason you can use that skull emoji is because Docomo introduced emojis with iMode in 1999. Talk about a comeback, huh? At the turn of the millennium, Japanese phones, or as they call them, Keitais, which is actually an abbreviation of Keitai Denwa, which is portable phone, so they're calling cell phones portables, which is also how French people call their cell phone, le portable. I hope I didn't butcher that. were getting crazier and crazier. And one of the main reasons for this is that both companies like Docomo that offer services and work with actual hardware manufacturers that make products for them, despite being clearly leaders when it came to mobile phone technology in the early 2000s, and despite them trying to expand outside of Japan, couldn't really compete with the European and American giants at the time. I mean, Sony ended up buying the Swedish Ericsson to try and reach into Europe, and that kind of worked. But for example, were you aware that iMode was a thing in Europe? Docomo even ended up sponsoring the Renault Formula 1 team from 2004 to 2006, but yeah, that didn't really work. And just like that, Keitai's turned into Gara case. Galapagos Keitai, Galapagos mobile phones, aka mobile phones that were incredibly advanced and with so many unique features that only worked in Japan. The name literally is a reference to how life in the Galapagos Islands developed entirely differently from the rest of the world. Japanese Keitais from the early 2000s are incredibly advanced compared to anything we had in the West. You could, before smartphones, do stuff like recording and sending videos over the internet. You could even watch the TV on some Keitais. Are you ever doing research for a video and you find a perfect source, but then it blocks you out just because you're European? What the hell? Well, today I have a solution for that, because it literally happened while I was working on this video. And that solution is today's sponsor, NORDVPN. Okay, so I have NORDVPN here on my MacBook. I can just open their app, connect to a server in Japan, and there we go! Nobody on the internet knows you're not in Japan if you're using NORDVPN. With 6,800 servers in 111 countries, dedicated apps for every platform, I even managed to get it working on my desktop computer running Arch. As you can see, I'm in Albania now. NordVPN does not keep or share any logs on what you do online, and even comes with security features like Threat Protection Pro and the Dark Web Monitor. One account can connect up to 10 devices, so even your smart microwave could benefit from NordVPN. If you want to enhance your browsing experience and never be limited by your location, go to nordvpn.com/fami for an exclusive offer of 2 years plus 4 extra months for free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/fami. And now, back to Gara case, the fact that Japan, already from the year 2000, had an entire ecosystem of phones that were extremely advanced and feature-rich compared to the US meant that when the iPhone came out in 2007, while it was like a big moment for us in the West, Japan had a very lukewarm reaction to it, because it was just a more expensive foreign phone that could do some of the stuff their phones were doing already, and didn't even have any physical buttons. The first iPhone to be sold in Japan will be the iPhone 3G, and only because Apple correctly recognized how the Japanese market had its own peculiarities and actually adapted the iPhone to introduce Japanese-centric features like emojis, which we then adopted and now use to do stuff like this. The iPhone 4 will be the first iPhone to finally break into the top 10 best-selling phones of the year for 2011 in Japan. However, if you take a look at the other spots on that list, you will figure out that most of them are either locally built new smartphones, because of course companies were trying to compete with the iPhone, or Gara case, like this one, because people still wanted them. Japan is an old country, it's full of people over 50 years old, and old people don't really like or embrace change quickly. This phone right here had a very specific audience. It was made for all the people that didn't want to upgrade to a smartphone in the era where the smartphone was starting to dominate, but still needed to access stuff like public services or use contactless payments that were slowly being moved over from the legacy Gara case structure where they used to belong in the early 2000s to the new smartphone technology. Basically, the world was going forward and is going forward, moving to a total reliance on smartphone technology, and some people just don't want smartphones. After turning on the Sharp Keitai 2, you really would have no idea this was running Android. Every single menu has been replaced to make it look like a dumb phone of old. Even the Android settings have been customized, so to see what Android version you're running, you need to go to the Other Settings option, which is just hiding the normal Android settings menus. And this is almost like a warning from the phone trying to tell us, look, yes, I'm running Android, but I'm not a smartphone, okay, buddy? And you can see this in every single minor thing. For example, this phone is not using Google Play services at all, because every single Google service here has been replaced by a Docomo equivalent, which I can't use because most of them are only working if you have a Docomo SIM card, which I don't have, And even if I had one, this stuff would not work outside of Japan because we are talking about a Garakei. Everything here only makes sense if you're using this phone in Japan. No Google Play services also means no Play Store, so there is no built-in way to install applications here, unless, again, you're in Japan and you're using a Docomo SIM card. Now, thankfully, this is still an Android phone, so all we have to do is go here to Other Settings, then Developer Options, and enable the USB debugging right here. Then we just have to connect our computer to the phone, and you'll see this thing pop up saying your computer's fingerprint is blah 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 blah, and you just need to press OK. I'm going to press always allow, so it's going to remember that. And now on our computer right here, we have to install Android tools, which is available for everything: Windows, Linux, Mac, Temple OS. So after you install the Android tools and you connect everything, you just need to type ADB devices. We can see we are connected, we are authorized, and all we have to do now to install an APK is type ADB install and the location of the file and press enter, and we are officially installing Telegram X here. Now keep in mind, this phone is running Android 5.1, which is pretty old, and I wouldn't recommend you use this daily because you're gonna get hacked bad. But if you want to try it out, you can only install applications that still work today with Android 5.1, and of those, you're limited to the ones that don't need to use Google Play services. So for example, Telegram X works fine, WhatsApp does not, Instagram Lite works fine, Elon Musk's $44 billion dark twisted fantasy does not. So great phone if you're trying to avoid doom scrolling, I guess. Speaking of scrolling, you can actually do that on this phone even though you have no touchscreen. I actually managed to use Instagram Lite without any problems and even post a story. And that's because if you're trying to use an application that requires you to touch your screen, you can hold the call button and the entire dial pad is going to turn into a touchpad, just like on a notebook. And you can basically do everything by moving this cursor around, as you can see right here. And this feature is called Touch Cruiser EX, and apparently it's been a mainstay of Sharp Keitai since 2007. It's not even the first pointing device ever put in a Keitai. Sharp just made their own one, but apparently NEC had something like this already years prior. And this, unfortunately, is not the only blast from the past, because we need to talk about... As I said, Telegram X works fine, so after sideloading a custom English keyboard, I tried using this phone to type one single message, and what you're about to see is the entire raw, painful experience of trying to do that. Hello. Oh my god, I'm typing in caps lock. I'm screaming, hello! Let me put it in... Okay, normal English. Hello, E1. I mean, I could get used to this, but it's painful. If for some reason you have a phone like this and you have to set it up, my pro tip is that you use scrcpy, which is basically a mirroring software that lets you control your phone using your computer, using ADB, because typing usernames and passwords with that keyboard, don't do that to yourself, please. And now, the cameras. Sorry, I mean camera... This cell phone only has one camera on the back, and let's say that's probably from 2008 too. Welcome to the ultimate frontier of video quality. In true flip phone fashion, we actually have two screens. This one right here is a 3.4 inches 960 by 540 screen, which is actually pretty good for the era, and it's not Retina, but it definitely does the job. But of course, you also have a secondary monochromatic .LCD screen here, which can actually change in its layout by pressing this button right here. You can not only set a custom ringtone for your different contacts, but also a different light color or pattern, so you know who's calling you even if your phone is in silent mode. That is, if you can get calls at all. I'm sorry for the weird background in this video. We're moving some furniture right now, and my usual shooting room is not available, so this looks like the worst conspiracy theory podcast you've ever seen. Anyway, there is something you have to know about Garakeis in case you want to buy one, because I know some of you are already on eBay trying to get a good deal, and that is that depending on where you live, you can't use them. For example, this specific Garakei that I have, the SH-01J, would not work in the US. The frequencies are specifically made for Japan, so if you want to actually use this with a SIM card to make calls or send messages or browse the web, that only works in some countries that have the same frequencies as Japan. My country in the EU does that, so I'm able to actually use the phone to make calls. Or at least I would be in theory, because I bought this phone from eBay and it was supposed to be unlocked. So I got it, I put in my SIM card, and then I discovered it actually had a Docomo SIM lock on it. And apparently there are different ways to unlock it. The most basic one would be going to Docomo in Japan, like physically, and actually asking them to do that, which is difficult when I live in Europe. The second way is apparently using the Docomo website, and there is a module to do it, but that didn't work. I didn't even manage to get to the page to unlock my phone. It simply wasn't an option. The third option is the most reliable and sane one, and that is giving your credit card number to a shady website and hoping that they will actually give you a PIN code to unlock your phone. And I did that. This option is brought up pretty often on the dumb phone subreddit, and while I didn't find it super trustworthy, I decided to give it a try. I'm not going to tell you the name of the website because I don't know who these people are. But anyway, I went to the website, I put in my email number, then I had to put in my credit card details, and of course I didn't trust the website, so I just made a disposable one. And at this point I was like, okay, they're probably going to just take my money and disappear. But eventually, after 20 minutes, I got an email with a long PIN code and it looked legit, so I put a SIM card in my Keitai and decided to give it a try. 02644. Is it going to work? Oh, it worked! It worked! Holy shit! The shady website worked. Wow, can I make phone calls now? Alright. So I should be calling now. I always feel like somebody's watching me. So, yeah, I can confirm it. The Associated Press can call it. The shady website actually sent me a working code. And I was able to use this Docomo phone right here after putting in my SIM card to call my mom. And she didn't even realize I wasn't using my iPhone to call her. She asked me why I wasn't giving her a grandson, so I closed the call, and after configuring the APNs for 4G manually, I was even able to get mobile internet working. So in theory, you could use this scrcpy as a fully working mobile phone, as a daily driver, if you wanted to, if you live in one of those countries where they actually work. Just check our dumb phones because they know everything about which phones work where. However, you shouldn't. You definitely shouldn't, because these phones are not made for that. These phones are made for old people using them in Japan. And I can prove that to you. Yes, you can call people now that it's unlocked, okay? However, for example, the phone always assumes everyone you're calling is actually in Japan. So you have to put the region code manually for every new number you're dialing, which is a bit of a pain in the ass if you're trying to just call a new number, for example, like a food place to order a pizza. And I know what you're about to say. Fami, I'm a Zoomer. I don't need to call a food place. I'm scared. I'm just gonna use a delivery app. Well, you can't do that here. Nothing works here, okay? That's what I'm trying to say. I see a lot of people on the dumb phone subreddit trying to make these phones viable by sideloading older or hacked versions of apps, but this phone was last updated in 2016. This is the most unsafe thing you could do. If after watching this video, what you want is a modern flip phone running Android, there are some newer ones that are actually up to date, but they're very expensive, so I would think about it twice. If you only want to get one of these as a novelty and you don't really want to use them daily, then getting an older one like mine is a great choice. It is a very nice piece of tech, and you can do stuff that my iPhone can do. For example, emulating old Y2Me games using physical buttons. That's great. Just please don't compromise your security or make your life harder for no reason just because you think this phone is cool. That said, before I go, I want to leave you with a final message. 68, 26, 26, 19, 46, 16, 57, 36, 48, 88.